welcome back to Storytime with YDRC. This episode, we're going to be continuing to read Warriors, Fire and Ice. Last time, we left off right at the beginning of Chapter 9, so that's what we're going to start for today. So let's get started. Fireheart woke to find Graystripe sitting beside him, hunched on his belly like a rabbit, his shoulders stiff and his fur fluffed out. "Graystripe?" he meowed quietly. Graystripe jumped. "Are you okay?" Graystripe sat up straight. "I'm fine." Fireheart suspected that his friend's cheery mew wasn't heartfelt, but at least he was trying to be more positive. "It looks cold," Fireheart meowed. Graystripe's words had billowed out in clouds. Fireheart was still snuggled down among the warmed bodies of the other warriors. "It is." Graystripe bent to lick his chest. Fireheart sat up and shook his head. The air tasted of frost. "What are you going to do with Brackenpaw today?" he asked. "Show him the forest," answered Graystripe. "I could bring Cinderpaw, and we could travel together." "It might be better if we travel alone today," answered Graystripe. Fireheart felt a bit hurt. They had been shown Thunderclan's hunting grounds together as apprentices. He would have liked to do it together again as mentors. But if Graystripe wanted to be by himself, then Fireheart could hardly blame him. "Fine," he mewed. "I'll see you later. We can share a mouse and compare apprentices." "That'd be good," Graystripe meowed. Fireheart crept out of the den. The air outside was even colder. His breath swirled from his muzzle like smoke. He shivered, ruffling out his fur, and stretched one leg at a time. The ground under his paws felt like stone as he trotted over to the apprentice's den. Cinderpaw was fast asleep inside, a fluffy gray heap that rose and fell as she breathed. "Cinderpaw," Fireheart called quietly, and the little gray cat lifted her head at once. Fireheart backed out, and in a moment Cinderpaw bounded from the den, wide awake and enthusiastic. "What are we doing today?" she mewed, looking up at him with her ears pricked. "I thought I'd take you on a tour of Thunderclan territory." "Will we see Thunderpath?" asked Cinderpaw eagerly. Yes, we will," Fireheart replied. He couldn't help thinking Cinderpaw would be disappointed when she saw what a dirty, stinking place it was. "Are you hungry?" he asked, wondering if he should tell her to eat first. "No," Cinderpaw shook her head. "Oh, okay. We'll eat later," Fireheart meowed. "Well, follow me." "Yes, Fireheart." The young cat looked up at him, her eyes sparkling. The pang of sadness that had been lingering in Fireheart's stomach since talking with Graystripe was swept away with a warm feeling of pride. He turned and padded toward the camp entrance. Cinderpaw raced past him and charged through the gorse tunnel. Fireheart had to break into a run to catch up. "I thought I said follow me," he called as he scrambled up the side of the ravine. "But I want to see the view from the top," Cinderpaw protested. Fireheart leaped after her. He overtook her easily, climbed to the top, and sat washing a forepaw, keeping an eye on her as she scrambled from rock to rock. By the time she reached the top of the camp ravine, she was panting, but no less enthusiastic. "Look at the trees! They look like they're made from moonstone," she mewed breathlessly. She was right. The trees below them sparkled white in the sunshine. Fireheart took a deep breath of cold air. "You should try to save your energy," he warned. "We have a long way to go today." "Oh, yes, okay. Which way now?" She kneaded the ground with impatient paws, ready to dart away into the woods. "Follow me," meowed Fireheart. He narrowed his eyes playfully. "And this time, I do mean follow." He led the way to a trail along the edge of the ravine, into the sandy hollow where he had learned to hunt and fight. "This is where most of our training sessions will be held," he explained. During Greenleaf, the trees that circled the clearing filtered the sunshine into a warm, dappled light. Now, the cold daylight streamed down onto the frozen red earth. "A river ran here many moons ago, a stream that still flows beyond that rise there," meowed Fireheart, pointing with his muzzle. "It's dry most of the summer. That's where I caught my first prey. What did you catch? Cinderpaw didn't wait for an answer. Will the stream be frozen? Let's look and see if there's eyes. She charged down the hollow and headed toward the rise. You'll see it another time, Fireheart called. But Cinderpaw kept running, and Fireheart had to race after her. He stopped beside her at the top of the rise, and together they looked down at the stream. Ice had formed at the edges, but the speed of the water and as it slid over its sandy bed had stopped it from freezing over completely. You wouldn't catch much there now, mewed Cinderpaw. Except fish, maybe. The sight of the spot where he had caught his first prey filled Fireheart with happy memories. He watched Cinderpaw stand at the edge of the stream and crane her neck to peer into the black water. If I were you, I'd leave fishing to RiverClan, Fireheart warned her. If they like getting their fur wet, then let them. I prefer dry paws. Cinderpaw padded restlessly around in the circle. What now? Her excitement and his own apprentice memories filled Fireheart with energy. He bounded away, calling over his shoulder, "The owl tree!" Cinderpaw charged after him, her short, fluffy tail sticking out behind her. They crossed the stream over a fallen tree that Fireheart had used many times. There are stepping stones farther down, but this is a quicker route. Be careful, though. The pale white trunk was stripped of its bark. It gets slippery when it's wet or icy. He let Cinderpaw cross first, keeping close behind in case she lost her paw hold. The stream wasn't particularly deep, but it would be cold as ice, and Cinderpaw was still too small to cope with the soaking. She crossed the log easily, and Fireheart felt a glow of pride as he watched his apprentice jump down onto the forest floor at the far end. Well done, he purred. Cinderpaw's eyes shone. Thanks, she mewed. Now, where's this owl tree? This way! Fireheart bounded away through the undergrowth. The ferns had turned brown since Greenleaf. By the end of Leaffall, they would be flattened by rain and wind, but now they stood tall and crisp. Fireheart and Cinderpaw wove their way beneath the arching fronds. Ahead, a massive oak towered above the surrounding trees. Cinderpaw tipped her head back, looking for the top. Does an owl really live here? She mewed. Yes, replied Fireheart. Can you see the hole in the trunk up there? Cinderpaw narrowed her eyes to peer through the branches. How do you know it's not a squirrel hole? Smell, Fireheart told her. Cinderpaw sniffed loudly, but shook her head, her eyes curious as she looked up at Fireheart. I'll show you what squirrels smell like another time, Fireheart meowed. You won't smell any around here. No squirrel would dare to make its nest so near an owl hole. Look at the ground. What do you see? Cinderpaw looked down, puzzled. Leaves? Try burrowing under the leaves. The forest floor was carpeted with brown oak leaves, crisp with frost. Cinderpaw began snuffling among them, then shoved her nose in right up to her ears. When she sat up, there was something the size and shape of a pine cone in her mouth. Yuck! Smells like crow food, she spat. Fireheart purred with amusement. You knew it was there, didn't you? Bluestar played the same trick on me when I was an apprentice. You'll never forget the stench. What is it? An owl pod, Fireheart explained. He remembered what Bluestar had told them. Owls eat the same prey as us, but they can't digest the bones and fur, so their bellies roll the leftovers into pods, and they spit them out. If you find one of those under a tree, it means you found an owl. Why would you want to find an owl? Squeaked Cinderpaw in alarm. Fireheart's whiskers twitched as he looked into her wide eyes, blue as her mother's. Frostfur must have told her the elders' tale of how owls carried off young kits who strayed from their mother's side. Owls get a better view of the forest than we do. On windy nights, when scents are hard to follow, you can look out for owls and follow where they hunt. Cinderpaw's eyes were still wide, but the fear had left them, and she nodded. She does listen sometimes, Fireheart thought with relief. Where next? Mewed Cinderpaw. The Great Sycamore, Fireheart decided. They traveled through the woods as the sun rose into the pale blue sky, crossing a two-legged path and another tiny stream. Eventually, they arrived at the sycamore tree. "It's huge!" Cinderpaw gasped. "Smellier says he climbed to the top branch when he was an apprentice," Fireheart meowed. "No way," mewed Cinderpaw. "Mind you, when Smellier was an apprentice, this tree was probably only a sapling," Fireheart joked. He was still gazing up when a rustling sound behind him told him Cinderpaw had dashed off again. He sighed and chased after her through the bracken. His nose detected a familiar scent that made him nervous. Cinderpaw was heading towards snake rocks. Adders! Fireheart picked up his pace. He emerged from the trees and looked around anxiously. Cinderpaw was standing on a boulder at the bottom of the steep, rocky slope. "Come on! I'll race you to the top!" she mewed. Fireheart froze, horror-struck, as she crouched, ready to spring onto the next boulder. "Cinderpaw, get down from there!" he yowled. He held his breath as Cinderpaw turned and scrambled down again. She stood trembling, her fur on end, as Fireheart rushed over to her. "This place is called Snake Rocks," he puffed. Cinderpaw looked up at him, her eyes huge. "Snake Rocks? Adders live up there. A bite from one of those would kill a cat as small as you." Fireheart gave Cinderpaw a quick lick on top of her head. "Come on, let's have a look at the Thunder Path." Cinderpaw stopped shaking at once. "The Thunder Path?" "Yep," meowed Fireheart. "Follow me." He led Cinderpaw through the ferns, along a trail that skirted Snake Rocks, and took them to the part of the forest where the Thunder Path cut through like a hard gray river of stone. Fireheart kept one eye on Cinderpaw as they peered out from the edge of the forest. He could see from her twitching tail that Cinderpaw was desperate to creep forward and sniff the Thunder Path ahead of them. A familiar roar was beginning to ruffle his ear fur, and he could feel the ground trembling beneath his paws. Stay where you are," he warned. "There's a monster coming." Cinderpaw opened her mouth a little. "Yuck," she mewed, screwing up her nose and flattening her ears. The rumbling noise was coming closer, and the shape appeared on the horizon. "Is that a monster?" she mewed. Fireheart nodded. Cinderpaw unsheathed her claws to grip the earth as the monster roared closer. She shut her eyes tight as it charged past, stirring the air around them into a storm of wind and thunder. She kept her eyes shut until the noise had faded into the distance. Fireheart shook his head to clear his scent glands. "Sniff the air," he meowed. "Can you smell anything apart from the Thunder Path stench?" He waited while Cinderpaw lifted her head and took several deep breaths. After a few moments, she mewed. "I remember that scent from when Broken Star attacked our camp. And it was on the kits he took, when you brought them home. It's Shadowclan. Is that their territory, beyond the Thunder Path?" "Yes," Fireheart answered, feeling his fur tingle at the thought of being so close to hostile territory. "We'd better get out of here." He decided to take Cinderpaw the long way home past Two-Leg Place, so she could see the tall pines and the tree-cut place. As they padded beneath the thin pine trees, the sense of Two-Leg Place made Fireheart uneasy, even though he'd lived in a place not far from there as a kid. "Stay alert," he warned Cinderpaw as she crept along behind him. "Two-Legs sometimes walk here with dogs." The two cats crouched under the trees to look at the fences that bordered the Two-Leg territory. The crisp air carried a scent to Fireheart's nose that stirred an odd feeling of warmth inside him, although he didn't know why. "Look!" Cinderpaw pointed her nose at a she-cat padding across the forest floor. The light brown tabby had a distinctive white chest and white front paws. Her belly was swollen, heavy with unborn kits. "Kitty pet!" sneered Cinderpaw, her fur fluffed out. "Let's chase her out." Fireheart expected to feel the familiar rush of aggression at the sight of a stranger on Thunderclan territory, but his hackles stayed flat. For some reason, he couldn't understand. He knew this cat wasn't a threat. Before Cinderpaw could attack, Fireheart deliberately brushed against a stalk of crunchy bracken. The she-cat looked up, disturbed by the cracking noise. Her eyes widened with alarm. Then she whipped around and set off at a lumbering pace. Out of the trees. Within moments, she was heaving herself over one of the two-leg fences. Rats! Complained Cinderpaw. I wanted to chase her. I bet Brackenpaw will have chased hundreds of things today. Yeah, but he probably didn't merely get bitten by an adder, replied Fireheart, twitching his tail at her. Now come on, I'm getting hungry. Cinderpaw followed him through tall pines, grumbling about the pine needles pricking her paws. Fireheart warned her to keep quiet, since there was no undergrowth here to hide in, and he felt every clan cat's discomfort at being in the open. They followed one of the stinking tracks gouged out by the tree-cut monster and stopped at the edge of the tree-cut place. It was silent, as Fireheart knew it would be until next Greenleaf. Until then, only the track marks, deep and wide and frozen into the soil, would remind Thunderclan of the monster that lived in their forest. By the time they arrived back at camp, Fireheart was exhausted. His muscles were still weary from the long journey with WindClan. Cinderpaw looked tired too. She stifled a yawn and padded away to find Brackenpaw. Fireheart spotted Graystripe beckoning to him from beside the nettle camp. Here, I've got you some fresh kill, Graystripe meowed. He hooked a dead mouse with his claw and flung it toward Fireheart. Fireheart caught it with his teeth and lay down next to Graystripe. Good day, he mumbled with his mouth full. Better than yesterday, answered Graystripe. Fireheart glanced up at him, worried, but Graystripe went on. I enjoyed it, actually. Brackenpaw's keen to learn, that's for sure. So is Cinderpaw. Fireheart went back to chewing. Mind you, Graystripe went on with a sparkle in his eye, I kept forgetting that I was the mentor and not the apprentice. Me too, Fireheart admitted. They shared tongues until the moon rose and the coldness of the night drove them into their den. Graystripe was snoring within moments, but Fireheart felt strangely awake. The image of the pregnant she-cat kept returning to his mind, and even though he was surrounded by the familiar smells of the Thunderclan, her soft kitty pet scent lingered in his nostrils. He fell asleep at last, but his dreams all carried the same scent, until finally he dreamed of his days as a kid. He remembered lying beside his mother's belly, curled in a bed softer than any forest moss, with his brothers and sisters. And still the scent of the she-cat lingered. Fireheart opened his eyes, suddenly jolted out of his sleep. Of course! The she-cat he had seen in the woods was his sister. Chapter 10. Fireheart woke at dawn with the image of his sister clear in his mind. He pushed his way out of the den, hoping that the routine of the day would distract him. It was another cold, frosty morning. Whitestorm and Longtail were waiting near the camp entrance, preparing to leave on patrol. Mousefur padded past on her way to join them and greeted Fireheart with a cheery mew. Whitestorm called for Sandpaw, who came racing out of her den just in time to follow the patrol as it pounded out of the camp. It was a scene Fireheart had watched many times, but for once he didn't yearn to join them as they thundered away into the morning fresh forest. He padded across the clearing, wondering if Cinderpaw was awake yet. Brindleface was just squeezing out of the narrow nursery entrance. A speckled kit followed her, then one more. A third kit, pale gray with darker flecks like the other, tumbled out and fell onto the ground. Brindleface picked it up by its scruff and placed it gently back on its paws. The tenderness of Brindleface's action brought Fireheart's dream flooding back. His mother had probably done the same for him. He knew that Brindleface's fourth kit had died soon after it was born, and she seemed to love the remaining kits even more fiercely now. Fireheart was overwhelmed by a pang of envy at the thought that the other cats here all shared something he did not. They were all clan-born. Fireheart had always been proud of his loyalty to the clan that had taken him in and given him a life he never would have known as a kitty pet. He still felt that loyalty, but he would die to protect Thunderclan. But no one in the clan understood or even respected his kitty pet roots. Fireheart felt certain that the she-cat he had seen yesterday would. With an ache in his heart, he wondered what memories they might share. Fireheart heard Graystripe's heavy paw steps beside him. He turned to greet his friend, stretching his head to touch Graystripe's nose, and asked, "Could you take Cinderpaw for the day?" Graystripe looked curiously at Fireheart. "Why?" "Oh, it's nothing important," replied Fireheart as casually as he could. "I just wanted to check out something I saw yesterday. Watch out for Cinderpaw, though. She doesn't listen to orders very well. Don't take your eyes off her, or she'll be charging off in every direction." Graystripe's whiskers twitched with amusement. "She sounds like a pawful. Still, it'll be good for Brackenpaw. He never charges off anywhere without thinking about it carefully first." "Thanks, Graystripe." Fireheart bounded away toward the camp entrance before his friend could remember to ask him where he was going. As the two-leg place came into view through the trees, Fireheart dropped into a crouch. He opened his mouth and breathed in the cold morning air. No sign of a Thunderclan patrol, and no two-leg scents either. He relaxed a little. Slowly, he approached the two-leg fence where he had seen the she-cat disappear. He hesitated at the bottom and looked around, sniffing the air once more. Then he leaped, landing on a fence post in one easy jump. No two legs to be seen, just an empty garden with its strongly scented plants. Fireheart felt exposed on the post. The branch of a tree hung low overhead. Its leaves had gone, but it would be easier to hide there. Silently, he pulled himself up and lay down to wait, flattening himself against the rough bark. Fireheart could see a swinging flap in the entrance to the two-leg place. He had used one just like it as a kid. He fixed his gaze on the flap, hoping his sister's face would appear at any moment. The sun rose slowly into the morning sky, but Fireheart started to feel cold. The damp branch was drawing heat from his body. Perhaps the two legs were keeping his sister shut in. After all, her kidding would be soon. Fireheart licked a paw and wondered if he should go back to the camp. Suddenly, he heard a loud clatter. Fireheart looked up and saw his sister pop out through the swinging flap. The fur along his spine rippled with anticipation, and Fireheart fought to stop himself from leaping down into her garden straight away. He knew he would frighten her, as he had done yesterday. He smelled like a forest cat now, not a friendly kitty pet. Fireheart waited until his sister had reached the end of the grass, and he crept to the tip of the branch and slipped down onto the fence. Quietly, he jumped into the bushes below. The she-cat's scent brought his dream flooding back to him. How could he get her attention without frightening her? Desperately, he searched his mind, trying to think of the name his sister had been given. He could remember only his own kitty pet name. Fireheart called softly from the bushes. "It's me, Rusty!" The she-cat stopped dead and looked around. Fireheart took a deep breath and crept out from the bushes. The cat's eyes widened with terror. Fireheart knew how he must appear to her, lean and wild, with the sharp forest scents on his pelt. The she-cat raised her hackles and hissed ferociously. Fireheart couldn't help feeling impressed by her courage. In a flash, he remembered his sister's name. "Princess, it's me, Rusty, your brother. Do you remember me?" Princess remained tense. Fireheart guessed she was wondering how the strange cat could know these names. He dropped into a submissive crouch, hope soaring in his chest as he watched his sister's expression slowly change from fear to curiosity. "Rusty?" Princess sniffed the air, wide-eyed and wary. Fireheart took a careful step forward. Princess did not move, so Fireheart edged closer. Still, his sister held her ground until Fireheart was standing only a mouse length away. "You don't smell like Rusty," she mewed. "I don't live with two legs anymore. I've been living in the forest with Thunderclan. I carry their scent now." She's probably never heard of the clans, Fireheart realized, remembering his own innocence before he'd met Graystripe in the woods. Princess stretched her nose forward and rubbed her muzzle cautiously along his cheek. But our mother's smell is still there, she murmured, half to herself. Her words filled Fireheart with happiness, until her eyes narrowed and she took a step backward, her eyes flat with distrust. Why are you here? She asked. I saw you yesterday in the woods, Fireheart explained. I had to come back to speak with you. Why? Fireheart looked at her in surprise. Because you're my sister? Surely she must feel something for him. Princess studied him for a moment. To Fireheart's relief, her guarded expression lifted. You're very thin, she mewed critically. Thinner than a kitty pet, maybe, but not thin for a forest cat. Fireheart replied. Your scent was in my dreams last night. I dreamed of you and our brothers and sister, and Fireheart paused. Where's her mother? She's still with her household, answered Princess. What about... Princess guessed what he was going to ask. Our brothers and sisters? Most of them live near here. I see them in their gardens from time to time. They sat silently for a moment. Then Fireheart asked, Do you remember the soft bedding of her mother's blanket? He felt a flicker of guilt about longing for such kitty pet softness, but Princess purred, Oh, yes, I wish I could have it for my own kitty. Fireheart's discomfort faded. It felt good to be able to talk of such tender memory without shame. Will this litter be your first? Princess nodded, uncertainty showing in her eyes. Fireheart felt a wave of sympathy. Even though they were the same age, she seemed to be very young and naive. You'll be fine, he mewed, remembering Brindle's face's kidding. You look as if your two legs treat you well. I'm sure your kits will be healthy and safe. Princess moved closer to him, pressing her fur against his flank. Fireheart felt his heart swell with emotion. For the first time since he was a kid, he caught a glimpse of what the clan cats must take for granted. The closeness of kinship, a common bond determined by birth and heritage. Suddenly, Fireheart wanted his sister to know about the life he led now. Do you know about the clans? Princess gazed at him, mystified. You mentioned the Thunderclan. Fireheart nodded. There are 4 clans altogether, he went on, the words tumbling out. In the clan, we take care of each other. Younger cats hunt for elders, warriors protect the hunting grounds from other clans. I trained all Greenleaf to become a warrior. Now I have an apprentice of my own. Fireheart could see by her bemused expression that his sister couldn't understand everything he was telling her. Yet her eyes brightened with pleasure as he spoke. It sounds like as if you enjoy your life, she mewed in awe. A 2-legged voice called from the house. Fireheart instantly darted under the nearest bush. I should go, Princess mewed. They'll be worried if I don't go back, and I have many tiny mouths to feed. I can feel them moving inside me. She glanced at her swollen belly, her eyes soft. Fireheart looked out from beneath the bush. Go then. I have to return to my clan anyway, but I'll come back and see you. Yes, I'd like that, Princess called over her shoulder. She was already trotting back toward her 2-legged nest. Goodbye! See you soon, Fireheart called. His sister disappeared from view, and he heard the swinging flap slap shut behind her. Once the garden was silent, Fireheart crept through the bushes to the fence. He jumped over it and ran into the forest. Memories of kithood sense crowded his mind, suddenly more real than the sense of the forest around him. Fireheart paused at the top of the ravine and looked down at the Thunderclan camp. He didn't feel ready to go back yet. He was worried that it would all seem strange to him. I'll go and hunt, he thought. Cinderpaw would be safe with Graystripe for a little longer, and the clan would welcome any extra fresh kill. He turned away and headed back into the forest. When he finally returned to the camp, he carried a vole and a wood pigeon in his mouth. The sun was setting, and the clan cats were gathering for their evening meal. Graystripe sat alone beside the nettle clump, a fat chaffinch at his paws. Fireheart nodded to him as he padded across the clearing to the pile of fresh kill that had already been collected. Tigerclaw was sitting below the high rock, his amber eyes narrow. I noticed that Cinderpaw spent the day with Graystripe, he meowed as Fireheart dropped his catch onto the pile. Where were you? Fireheart returned Tiger Claw's gaze. It seemed a good day for hunting. Too good to waste, he replied, his heart thudding in his chest. The clan needs all the fresh kill it can get at the moment. Tiger Claw nodded, suspicion darkening his eyes. Yes, but we also need warriors. Cinderpaw's training is your responsibility. I understand, Tiger Claw, Fireheart meowed. He dipped his head respectfully. I'll take her out tomorrow. Good. The deputy turned his head and looked around the camp. Fireheart picked up a mouse and carried it over to eat next to Graystripe. Find what you were looking for? Asked Graystripe absently. Yes. Fireheart felt a pang of sorrow for the pain in his friend's eyes. Are you thinking about that RiverClan warrior? I do try not to, answered Graystripe quietly. It's just when I'm alone, I can't help remembering Barkface's prediction of an unnecessary death and trouble ahead. Here, Fireheart interrupted, and pushed his mouse toward Graystripe. That chaffinch looks like it'll be half feathers, and I'm not that hungry. Want to swap? Graystripe shot him a grateful glance, and the two friends exchanged prey and began to eat. As he crunched on the chaffinch, Fireheart scanned the clearing. He could see Sandpaw and Dustpaw outside the apprentice's den. Dustpaw was busy ripping apart a rabbit. Fireheart caught Sandpaw's eye, but she looked away. Cinderpaw lay beside the old tree stump where he'd shared many meals as an apprentice. She was chatting enthusiastically to Brackenpaw, who nodded from time to time while plucking the feathers from a sparrow. Seeing the two cats, brother and sister, lying together, so at ease, reminded Fireheart once more of Princess. And for the first time, the familiar sights of his clan made Fireheart feel uneasy. He had been careful to lick his sister's smell from his fur before returning to camp, but it was her scent that lingered in his nostrils as the sun disappeared over the distant horizon. He had found the closeness he had missed, but it had given shape to a sense of loneliness that, until now, had lain vague and nameless in his heart. Were the deep-rooted memories he shared with Princess stronger than his loyalty to the clan? All right, guys, that's going to end off this episode of Warriors Into the Wild, Warriors Fire and Ice. As always, before we end it off, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. That's it. Bye, guys.